Bismillah ar-Rahman Rahim. Welcome back, friends. Welcome to another video lecture by Kami Biology. Today in this video lecture we are going to talk about difference between innate and adaptive immunity. Okay, and this lecture is actually presented by me. So let's start. First of all, let's talk the difference between the definition of innate and adaptive immunity. Now, if we talked about the adaptive immunity, so it is the immune response against a specific antigen. Okay, it is the immunity which is activated against a specific antigen, against a specific microbes or against a specific pathogen. For example, bacteria, virus, against bacteria, one kind of microorganisms it may be activated. Now, if we talked about the innate immunity, so innate immunity is that type of immune response which is activated against any kind of microorganisms. It will be activated against any kind of microorganisms. Okay, and one thing more, it is immediate protective response of the immune system that does not require, this immunity does not require that the microorganism will just get internalized. What actually happen during innate immunity, once our body is cut or our body is exposed to the microorganism, so then the microorganism will enter, and before they causing the disease, this immunity is activated, this system is activated, and they will kill the microorganism or pathogen or antigen before causing a disease. So it is called innate immunity. That's the difference between their definition. Now let's talk about the specificity of innate immunity and adaptive immunity. Now first, what is the specificity of adaptive immunity? Adaptive immunity is also called specific immunity. Why? It is also called specific immunity and it is also called acquired immunity. Now, why we call that specific immunity? We call that specific immunity because it is activated against a specific microorganism. For example, E. coli, Klebsiella, poliovirus. So against a specific microorganisms, this immunity is activated. That's why we call that specific immunity. Now, why we call it acquired? Because it is acquired or it may be activated when we take the vaccine. Okay, or when we take some foreign things inside our body, then this adaptive immunity will be activated. That's why we call that acquired immunity. Okay, next, innate immunity. Now if we talked about the specificity of innate immunity, so we also call that what? Non-specific, because it is not a specific against microorganisms. So it is non-specific and it is natural. It is present inside our body all the time, and it's naturally present inside. We cannot acquire it from the other body as well. It is present inside our body all the time. Now, the second thing is that it may be activated against every microorganism. It may be activated virus, bacteria, euglena, fungi, every kind of the microorganism. Such a system may be activated. Now let's talk about the types of the defense. What kind of the defense systems are involved in the innate and in the adaptive immunity. Now if we talk the adaptive immunity, so inside the adaptive immunity, it involved the third line of defense system, because it is not the first line of the defense system, it is the third line of defense system. Why? Because first of all, our body, our skin face the microorganisms. When the microorganisms are come, so they will first fight with our skin, the normal flora of our skin, or the area present outside our skin. First of all, the microorganism will have to face this area. So that's why we call that it is the third line of the defense system. Now if we talk the innate immunity, so innate immunity is actually the first line or the second line of the defense system. Why? Because skin is actually the innate immunity. It is usually mentioned in the innate immune system. That's why we call that this innate immune system are what? This innate immune system are the first or second line defense system, while the adaptive immunity are what? While the adaptive immunity are the third line of defense system. Okay. Now let's talk about the components. What kind of the components innate immunity contain and what kind of the components adaptive immunity contain? Let's talk about it. First of all, adaptive immunity. If we talked about the adaptive immunity, so it contains humoral and cell mediated immunity, or are the components of the specific immune responses. I already I just a little bit I explained this humoral and humoral and cell mediated. Just a little bit their definition. If you missed that video, humoral and cell mediated, so it is present in tumor. You just go back and you can watch it. Okay, so it is actually, you know, the main component of the adaptive immunity are the humoral and cell mediated. Okay, now if we talked about innate immunity, so the main component of the innate immunity is the normal flora of our body. Now, what does normal flora means? Normal flora means, for example, if we talked about the bacteria E. coli, which is present inside our stomach, means inside the intestine, so it is usually responsible to produce vitamin K. So it is actually normal flora. So normal flora are actually the microorganisms which are present inside or outside our body to protect us from the other invading or from the other microorganisms that are harmful for us. Okay, so we can say that the normal flora are the component of innate immunity. Physical barriers means skin, mucus, all these are the physical barrier. Chemical barriers means the tears, lysosomes which are comes out from the tears, phagocytes means WBC, neutrophils, these are the macrophages, these are the phagocytes. It also contain, these are also the innate immuno component. Then we have histamine, we have inflammation, fever means a temperature which is usually activated. It is also, you know, the main component of innate immunity. Complement proteins C1, C2, C3, CQ1, just like this kind of protein. Inshallah we will discuss the complement system and their protein in much more detail. Okay, or the component of the non-specific immuno responses. Okay, so all these are the what? All these are the non-specific immuno component. So now let's talk the next. So then we have a cells. So what kind of the cell innate immunity contain and what kind of the cell adaptive immunity contain? Let's talk about that. First of all, adaptive immunity. You know, adaptive immunity usually contain what? Adaptive immunity contain lymphocytes. Lymphocyte means T cell and B cells. Okay, so they contain T and B cells. Now let's talk about that what kind of the cell innate immunity contain and what kind of the cell adaptive immunity contain. First of all, the adaptive immunity. The adaptive immunity contain lymphocytes, means B cell and T cell. Okay, B lymphocyte or T lymphocyte we also call that. And antigen presenting cells, macrophages, dendritic cells, all nucleated cells are actually the antigen presenting cell, are involved in generating a specific immune response. Okay, so these are the cells which usually involved in the adaptive immunity. And then we have and the cells which are involved in innate immunity. These are the phagocytes such as macrophages, neutrophils, natural killer cells, monocytes, mast cells, dendritic cells. All these cells are involved in the innate immune system. You know, we already talked about all these cells in detail. If you miss these the cells, immuno cells, so then it is present into my channel, you can watch it. Then next we have immunological memories. You know, this slide is very important for the innate and adaptive. Now this difference is very important, so let's talk about this one difference. If we talked about adaptive immunity, their immunological memory, so they have, you know, a high memory as compared to the innate immunity. Now why they have high memory? Because they can catch the memory of the pathogen which the pathogen invade us before. Okay, so that's why they can catch the memory. And on the other hand, if we talked about the immunological memory of the innate immunity, so they don't have the immunological memory. They don't store the memory of the pathogen which invade us before. Okay, so they don't have the memory. Now, but on the other hand, the adaptive immunity have a specific memory. Then we have effectiveness. Now, adaptive immunity, if we talked about the effectiveness of adaptive immunity, so it is more effective than innate immunity. Now, why? Because it is activated against a specific microorganisms, and they can kill the specific microorganisms quickly as compared to the innate immunity. Now, on the other hand, the innate immunity is activated, but they can kill it, although it is activated faster or quickly as compared to adaptive immunity, but they can take longer time for the killing of the microbes. This adaptive immunity can take a very few minutes or a very few seconds to kill the microorganisms. Okay, so that's why we can say that it is more effective as compared to the innate immunity. On the other hand, if we talked about innate immunity or the non-specific immune response is less effective than a specific responses. Okay, then we have the presence. Now, this, if we talked about the presence of innate and adaptive immunity, so innate immunity are usually present at the birth, or it is present inside our body by birth. We can take it from the parents, or it is usually present naturally inside our body. Now, on the other hand, if we talked about the adaptive immunity, so develop or created in response to foreign substance. It is not present usually inside our body. It may be activated and it may be created when the microorganisms are get internalized. Once the microorganisms are get internalized, then this adaptive immunity are activated. Okay, it is not present by birth. Keep it in your mind. Now, if we talked about the responses of the innate and adaptive immunity, so adaptive immunity can take 1 or 2 weeks for the activation. Thus, we can say that they have slow response against the microorganisms. And if we talked about the innate immunity, as we know that it is activated against every microorganism, so they have rapid or quick response. Now, the time span, let's talk about the time spans between the innate and adaptive immunity. In case of innate immunity, once it is activated inside the body of the human, then it may be present inside our body in our whole times. Okay, it may be present in our body in our whole times, or in our whole life it is present inside our body. On the other hand, if we talked about the adaptive immunity, so it may take long or short period of time. If we talked about the time span or the lifespan of the adaptive immunity, so sometimes they have long term or sometimes they have short life. Okay. Now let's talk about this the innate immunity. If we talked about the inheritance of the innate immunity, so we usually take it from the parents, and this innate immunity is transferred to the offspring as well. Okay. On the other hand, it is opposite. We cannot be inheritance. It means that we cannot take it from the parents, and such adaptive immunity are not transferred to the offspring as well. It may be activated during lifetime. During a specific lifetime, it may be activated. Now let's talk about the involvement of the complement system, that what kind of the complement system contain inside the innate and adaptive immunity. Inside innate immunity, they contain alternative and lectin pathways. Inshallah, we will discuss this alternative and lectin pathway in the complement system. And they have also, and on the other hand, if we talked about adaptive immunity, so they contain classical pathway. Okay, don't worry about the classical and alternative and lectin pathway. We all discuss it inshallah in the complement systems. Then we have the examples that how we can know that what kind of the immunity is actually activated inside our body. Now, for the innate immunity, for the identification of the innate immunity, or for the example of the innate immunity, whenever the WBC are fight against the pathogens, or it fight against any kind of the microorganisms, and once it is engulfed by the neutrophils or macrophages, then it is converted, then it is break down into small fragments. Due to this way, the redness is created inside our body, and the swelling is actually activated inside our body, or all these things are actually happen inside our body. Okay, now whenever this phenomena is happen inside our body, then we should have to know that it is actually the innate immunity that are activated inside our body. Okay, usually it is activated when the body is cut or exposed. On the other hand, if we talked about adaptive immunity, so it may be activated, or if we talked about the example of the adaptive immunity, so whenever we take the vaccine, okay, whenever we take the vaccine against the chicken pox, against the cowpox, against the polio virus, so after that, such kind of disease are eliminated in our whole life, and this kind of the disease will be not activated again. Okay, so this is actually the example of the adaptive immunity. Okay, so that's all about the difference between innate and adaptive immunity. I hope you understand about this video lecture. If you like this video, so make sure to hit the like button, share this video, and also subscribe the channel to get more interesting video lecture like that. If there is something missing, and if you have any kind of question in your mind, so we can write it into a comment. Inshallah, I will give you answer as soon as possible. Thanks for watching. See you next time. Bye.